Okay, so it's time for another What Am I Sowing and Growing video, and this time we're talking about April and May. And I do like to always just do a quick skim through what happened with the March sowings, so I'm going to do that now. So first up we've got the parsnips, which I interplanted into the spinach bed, and I chitted those seeds, and so pre-germinated them. It took them about 10 days, something like that, to germinate, and I planted those. And they are almost all up now, so that's a really nice thing to see. All the leeks are up, all the beans are actually sitting right in front of me here, and French beans, they're looking pretty good. I think not far off flowering now. All of my early carrots are now up, they're all outside now under fleece and looking quite nice. The celeriac's growing well. The tumbler and the Shirley tomatoes, they're in the hanging baskets actually just down here behind me, and looking pretty good. I can't wait to get those into the polytunnel, but it'll be a few weeks yet. What else have we got? All the lettuces are planted out, looking nice. All the brassicas, so all the Brussels sprouts, and the kales and the red cabbages and the colettes and things like that. I pricked all those out yesterday, and so they're looking pretty good, and they won't actually get planted out until May, so they've got plenty of time. The early courgettes have just broken surface. The parsley actually failed on me, so I do occasionally get a bad batch of seeds or just old seeds, whatever. Parsley was one of those, so I've resowed those. And the last of my potatoes that I started in little pots, they're doing pretty well, and they're going to get planted out about 2 weeks time into one of my deep cold frames. So those are my early main crops. Beetroots are all up, looking good. Radish, of course, there's nothing really to talk about radish. It's hardly the most difficult thing to grow. And that, I think, is pretty much it. I've just sowed my early main crop tomatoes. So I've got some first early tomatoes, and I say they're growing quite well. I'll have about 8 plants of those early ones. And that means I can sow my early main crops a little bit later than most people probably do. And that just is, I like doing that because I've got so much growing in the polytunnel, and I don't like to be under any stress to get that stuff, the spring crops, out before I put my summer crops in. So April is such an easy month. You can pretty much do anything in April and it'll pretty much succeed. So in terms of what seeds to sow, almost anything basically is the answer to that, but I'll go through anyway and talk about the things that I'm doing. I suppose the only things that I wouldn't be doing are cabbages for winter, for example, purple sprouting broccoli, some things like that. Leave those to later, and you'll see some of that in June. So what am I doing in April? Well, I'm restarting turnips. So I don't do any turnips last month because I find that they run to seed. But in April you can restart turnips again and they grow just fine. Obviously loads and loads of radishes. I won't talk about those anymore. I've already done my first batch of red cabbages. I do one more batch of red cabbages in April. I won't do any more then for the rest of the year because they hold really well in the ground. They just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Just don't leave them too long or they might split or go rotten. So I've already done my first early and second early dwarf French beans, so I've still got to do my first early climbing French beans, which will go in the polytunnel. So I'll do those sort of the beginning of April time, and then I'll do my main crop dwarf French beans, and I'll do those in May. Carrots. So carrots are a massively important crop to me, and I'll just talk a little bit about what I'm doing with the carrots. So I have overwintered ones, which I start in sort of the end of October, the beginning of November, maybe over a sort of 2 week period. That gives me actually quite a nice staggered harvest. Even though they were only 2 weeks apart, it does actually make quite a big difference to the time that they mature. So they're growing really nicely now. They're about this sort of size. And I've got some in the polytunnel, I've got some outside under fleece. And then I've got the ones that I started back in March, and they're about that sort of size now, and they're outside as well under fleece. I will take the fleece off, it's just because we're having this really cold snap, but as long as it's above freezing, I generally take the fleece off and just leave them to it. I will be starting my first outdoor carrots, which will go under fleece again. Sorry about this cough. In early April, and I'm going to do a mix of Touchon and Mercurio. So Mercurio are a faster growing one, which will be for early summer. Then I'll do Touchon, which is actually my favourite, and I'll do those for sort of later summer. The beauty of Touchon is they hold really well in the ground. Yeah, in fact, I was still eating Touchon in February. I don't kind of really subscribe to this little and often idea with carrots. I just sow something that holds well in the ground, and you can start eating them in September and carry on eating them, all the way through February, March sort of time. Same is true of Eskimo, which is another fantastic carrot, again, which holds beautifully. So then I'll do my last batch of, some people call them like a first early swift. They're just a fast growing potato really. And I'll do my last batch of those about the middle of April. Still not done any main crop potatoes at all. I've only done early main crops. So then, so this is slightly interesting. So one of the things, and I'd like some feedback on this, because one of the things I struggle to do is to get really good quality, and I generally only eat things if they're good quality, salad onions in midsummer. So, really late July and August and actually into September. So we kind of struggle in that period to get good salad onions. Now, we have tried all sorts of different varieties, just don't seem to do very well for us. All the rest of the year, I have salad onions, no problem at all. So what we did last year was we started some main crop onions. We chose North Holland Blood Red because they do work well as a salad onion. They're very sweet. And we started those in the middle of April. And that's late for an onion. And we planted them quite high density, probably about 6 to a clump. And they didn't really thrive. But what we got was loads of kind of 1 inch sized onions. So we planted them, I say, really high density. And then we took the outer layers off those onions, so they were about 3/4 of an inch, and we used those in salads, and they were absolutely amazing. And to be honest, I didn't really miss conventional salad onions, bunching onions, whatever you want to call them, for that period. I just loved these super crunchy, beautifully coloured, because North Holland Blood Red, the kind of, there's a hint in the name, are a really lovely looking onion. Anyway, so that's what we're going to do again this year. So middle of April, really high density, probably about 250 per square metre. And just so 1 square metre will basically be enough to see us through that period from the end of July all the way through August and all the way through September in our salads. And then we'll switch back to the traditional salad onions in October. So now I think is the time to do anything other than Bolt Hardy or Pablo or any of those other early beetroots. So I really like, for example, to do Burpee's Golden, but Boldor is another good equivalent. I just find that really planted out any time before May, these golden beetroot, they just don't do very well. They just, they might not die, but they just don't thrive. And so I prefer to start mine about the 14th of April, which means I'm planting them out about 3 weeks later. so first week in May. And yeah, then they do great. And so, I just don't think it's worth doing them any earlier, based on my experience. So I'm really looking forward to those, because we've only got a few. I think we've got like 30 in store or something. So we probably will actually run out of golden beetroot, which is, I always consider that to be a failure, because I like to eat beetroot pretty much every day of the year. We also will do, Bold Hardy, Pablo, just a traditional red beetroot as well. We've got loads of beetroot actually going at the moment, so I've got some that are sort of this sort of height, off the top of this tablet. So they're looking pretty good, and they should be ready, in about 6 or 7 weeks' time, something like that. And they will definitely be ready before we run out of the ones in store. So although I've already done my main crop, colettes and Brussels sprouts, I will do another batch, and that's partly because I have beds coming free to plant in June, and so I like to have something to go into those beds. And by far the most important brassica crop we grow are colettes and Brussels sprouts. So we particularly like the red Brussels sprouts, and the actual sprouts are lovely, but the leaves are amazing as well. I think I'm going to try high density Brussels sprout planting with the red varieties, specifically for the leaves. I'm not even bothering to harvest them for the actual Brussels sprout themselves, just because we love the leaves so much. Anyway, another batch, middle of April, in addition to the ones that I did in the middle of March. Spinach. So I have done my last batch of true spinach now. We planted that out last week on Debbie's plot. It's only about this sort of size at the moment. The batch before that is ready for harvest, and last week we were harvesting the last really of the overwintered spinach. We've still got a little bit of it, but really we're switching over now. We're transitioning to the new season spinach, the new season varieties, our favourite varieties for spring, Red Kitten. And that will see us through for the next couple of months, and then we'll switch over to Mikado. And Mikado is an Asian spinach. It doesn't bolt as quickly in the heat, so that's really nice, and that kind of sees us through into July time. And then we switch over to New Zealand spinach, and I'm doing New Zealand spinach in two ways. I've pricked out some self-seeded New Zealand spinach that is growing on the allotment at the moment, and obviously I pricked them out about this sort of size, and I move them into the polytunnel, and they grow just a little bit faster in the polytunnel than in the self-seeded in the cold frame, because it's just a little bit warmer for them. But I'll also start some of my own seeds, because New Zealand spinach is a pretty important crop for us. We don't really take a risk with it. Beauty of New Zealand spinach, so much better than true spinach, because as I say, true spinach just bolts really, really quickly in summer, whereas New Zealand spinach goes all the way through summer. So you start harvesting it sort of late June probably, and then you finish harvesting it maybe early October. So it's got an incredibly long growing period. It's really prolific. It is a little bit slower to pick than true spinach, and that's really its only downside. I think it tastes even better than true spinach. It's probably just as healthy as true spinach. Asian spinach is kind of halfway between the two. It bolts a little bit slower, but it will still bolt in summer, and so you still need some sort of alternative. And for me, that is New Zealand spinach. But you could also use perpetual spinach, which is really in the chard family, or you could use chard itself, or you could use beetroot leaves, for example. And that brings me on to chard, because middle of April is about when I'll do my main crop chard. I don't like to do it any earlier than that, because I do find that it will run to seed too quickly if it's planted out too early. But you will get a crop off it, so it really just depends on if you're prepared to just grow it for a relatively short period of time, and accept the fact that it'll run to seed, then that's fine. If you just want to be a bit safer and be sure that it's just going to go all the way through winter for you without running to seed, Then middle of April, oh, what's happening with this tablet? It's just like messing around. Let me just sort this out. Right. Then middle of April, I think, is kind of the earliest I would sow it. And I will also do a late batch, which I put into the polytunnel, and that's the stuff that we're eating now, and it's really prolific at this time of year. Keep catching the tablet with my finger, and it just like keeps jumping to a different screen, and I have to scroll back to the right screen. What a pain. Anyway, next up are my second early. Everything's first earlies and second earlies and main crops with me. Courgettes. So I'm only going to do two. I'm going to do Ambassador and Gemma. And the only reason I consider these to be a second early, the first early is going to polytunnel, is that I will wrap these up with bubble wrap. So anything that kind of gets special attention and is looked after and pampered is either a first early or a second early for me. And then the main crop stuff just gets planted out in the ground and just looks after itself. So I consider middle of April about right for second earlies, and I don't do very many, of course. I'll only do 2 or 3 plants, something like that, which is plenty for us as an early crop. Then golden purslane. So golden purslane is a firm favourite for us in the salad mixes. You can cook with it, in fact, and if you look at the growing guide for golden purslane in my ebook, which I'll link to down below, then you'll see there's a nice recipe that one of the viewers sent to me from Italy, I think. Yeah, so you can try that if you want to cook with it. But in my case, we don't generally cook with it. We generally eat it fresh. It's incredibly succulent, fresh tasting, full of healthy omega-3 fatty acids, as well as all the other goodies, vitamins and minerals that are in most veggies, and just tastes amazing, and everybody seems to love it. So we grow 2 big beds of that, and I don't prick it out, so I sow it direct into a module, a couple of seeds in each module, and then leave it to grow in the modules. I find that if you prick it out, it does set it back a couple of weeks, which is quite a long time actually. So try to minimise root disturbance. If you plant the modules though, they're fine. So there seems to be no transplant shock of the whole module, just the little tiny seedlings when they're that sort of size. If you prick those out, don't do so well. Do another batch of lettuces. We're always doing new batches of lettuces. It's hardly worth talking about. Parsnips. I generally do my parsnips a bit late, so I do them sort of middle of April to the beginning of May sort of time. I find that it has to be that late for me to get good, reliable germination. If I do them earlier than that, which I have done, and I've got them germinated now, and they're about this sort of size, then chitting is the best way to go, because it's a bit cold in the ground to get them to germinate without chitting. And then more carrots. I've actually done a germination test of my carrots, because I happened, for some unknown reason, to have 3 different packets of Touchon carrots. As I say, Touchon are my favourite carrots. Maybe I just going a bit over the top, making sure I'd got some. And so I've opened all 3 packets, and as I've done a germination test on kitchen roll to see which one has the most reliable germination, because if it's one thing that I really worry about, it's carrots not germinating. So I want to try and sort that out. And then 22nd of April, I'm here, but then I don't slavishly follow this plan, but as a rough idea, about the 3rd week in April anyway, that's when I do all my potatoes that are not considered first earlies or second earlies. And that's kind of my definition of first earlies and second earlies, which is a bit different to the rest of the world, unfortunately, which makes it a bit confusing. But if you want to understand it, then you have to read my guide to growing potatoes. But anyway, Cara, Estima, Charlotte, Nicola are the 4 different varieties of potatoes. Some of those are considered second earlies, some of them are considered first earlies, and some of them are considered main crop by the rest of the world. I just plant them all at the same time. And yeah, all of those are going into containers. They're all going down the side of the house, and I leave them in the containers for the whole of their lives. And we've still got 5 tubs and 4 on the allotment, I think, so 9 tubs in total, which I've got to get through by the end of April, which is when these potatoes here behind me will be ready. And there's another one there. So they'll be ready middle to the end of April, and they're my early main crop potatoes. So then we've got the first batch of sweet corn. I know some people just do all of their sweet corn at the same time. I don't. I will do at least 3 batches of sweet corn separated by a few weeks, just so that I get a nice staggered harvest. I'll stick to the same variety, otherwise I might not get a nice staggered harvest. I'm doing incredible this year for all of them, and yeah, they'll be planted in different locations, and hopefully they will work out quite nice, and you know, harvest those between sort of August and through September. And then I'm doing my squashes. So I'm doing, for summer squashes, I'm doing courgettes, trumbustinos, and yellow ball. So yellow ball is a courgette. I'm doing, as I said, Gemma and ambassador courgettes as well. And the I'm totally useless, aren't I, at pronouncing things. Trumbocino or something like that. And anyway, you can see it down the side of the screen here. And that is, if you harvest it in summer when the plants are fairly small, it's like a courgette but without any seeds. You can leave it to grow on and harvest it and store it as a winter squash. We don't tend to do that because we don't like it quite as much like that. But we love it as a summer squash, and it just looks amazing as well. Everybody likes getting it in their veg boxes. And then for the winter squashes, I'm doing Crown Prince, Winter Buffy Ball, Sweet Dumpling, and another hopeless one for pronouncing, Ushikuri. That's the orangey red one. So that's quite a nice little range. I've chosen our favourite, which is Crown Prince, which will grow creeping across the ground on Debbie's plot. It's too big really to grow on a climbing frame. But the other 3 are all relatively small, so they'll all be on my new climbing frame on the allotment. So I'm quite excited to try those. And towards the end of April, because I've just done my the tomatoes that I'm growing in the polytunnel, so I sowed those yesterday. The ones I'm going to do on the 28th of April, or thereabouts, about the 4th week in April, those are the outdoor tomatoes, and they're going to stick with tumbler for those in the main. I might try the odd other variety, but 90% of those will be tumbler, but I'll do 2 successions of them, because what I find is that the tumblers, they just come all at the same time, so all over like a 3-week period, and we're just like overwhelmed with tumbler, and they're really, really tasty. We really like them, but they're just massively prolific for a tiny period of time. So 2 successions a few weeks apart. And that is April. So I'm going to fly through May, because I haven't fully planned May, but this gives you a rough idea of the difference between what I do in April and what I do in May. And actually, there's not that much difference, to be honest. But anyway, let's talk about it quickly. So I will do a second batch of Crown Prince and Winter Buffy Ball, and that is just a contingency against the kind of hard frost late in May, which we sometimes get wiping out the first batch, and just in case a bit of space opens up or any other thing kind of happens, maybe I take pity on some of my allotment neighbours that haven't sown any squash, and then I've got some spares to give them. So just a few in May, which will then be planted out in June if I need them. And then, as I said, a second batch of tumbler to go out in the garden in 30-litre containers, close to my brick wall, where they really like the kind of reflected heat from the wall. And at night, they like the fact that the brick wall has absorbed loads of heat and it re-radiates it at night, keeps them a little bit warmer. So they do really nicely there. And then, really, May is all about carrots for me. So that is when I'm going to do my autumn carrots and my winter carrots and my early spring carrots. So that's a lot of carrots, you know, thousands of carrots. Again, I'm doing Touchon and Eskimo. So there's a few successions of carrots that you'll see in this grow guide, which again you can find a link to this in the description. I'll do my next batch of sweet corn, and then another batch of tumbler. So again, just a couple of weeks between those, and I'll do some collards, and I'll do my final batch of sweet corn. So that is pretty much what I'm doing in May. So not that much. I might add a few little bits and pieces to that, but I'll talk about that in the May sowing guide, because I'll have thought it through a little bit more carefully. So I did just want to point out that if you're kind of interested in what I did last year, so you want to see videos, for example, from April, or you want to see what I sowed in April, or what I planted in April, or what I sowed in May, or what I planted in May, or you want to see videos of May, of tours, or anything like that, I've got a reference information section in my ebook, and I love this section, and I'm always talking about it on these videos just because I love it so much, because I'm always asking myself that question. You know, all this sort of dry data in a database, it's all well and good, but there's nothing that beats actually going and looking at what you did last year and having it all nicely structured month by month by month. And you can see my video diaries for each of the weeks of the year last year. You can see, you know, what I actually sowed, what I actually planted. You can see my seedling progress videos. You can see my tour videos. You can see these seed sowing guides for last year and for all of this year so far. So if you're new to this video, for example, this video series that I do every month, you can go back and look at last month's, and then you can see what I said last month and compare it to the progress that I talked about this month. So I really like that reference information section, and it also has, as a kind of header images, a sample harvest photo for that month as well. We harvest that amount basically every week, but the video, those images give you a kind of an idea of how our diet changes throughout the year. I also generally try to do one harvest video each month as well, and that again kind of shows you the sort of diet that we're eating. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now because I think I've done, I don't know, like maybe 30 minutes or so, so a little bit quicker than last month. So, my name's Steve, this is the Seaside Kitchen Garden and Allotment channel, and if you want any more than all the things I've talked about, then I do have written an ebook. There's guides to every single veg, pretty much, that I grow, how to grow them, all the different successions, approaches to self-sufficiency, all the basics of gardening, how to sow seeds, you know, how to plant, how to look after the soil, how to fertilise, how to deal with weeds and pests and all those sorts of things, as well as year-round growing guides, advanced growing techniques, loads and loads of stuff. So if you want any of that, links in the description to all that. See you soon.